2025. This is Information Security Now. Information Security Now is a live stream podcast about technology, information security, cybersecurity, various aspects of technology and hacking, and we usually deal with information security and cybersecurity predominantly, but we do get into technology more generally as well. So we've been tracking all month the hack that affected Jaguar Land Rover, and in that case, excuse me, everyone. Excuse me. Jaguar Land Rover is actually in need of, I believe this said a furlough. Let me determine this. $1.5 billion quid loan from the government, guaranteed JLR in a bid to support its supplier as a cyber attack continues to halt production. This is a very long run supply chain attack, and I don't think I've seen anything be this long. You hear of attacks and then they hit, and usually things are contained fairly quickly once the information is revealed, and there may be repercussions, but this seems like a very extreme repercussion. Concerns: some suppliers, small businesses could go bust due to the prolonged shutdown. And for these suppliers, the supply chains are very delicate. They're robust, but in the supply chains overall are robust, but when it comes to individual suppliers and how they run their businesses and make their margins, and it's a very complicated and not simple. Company operates largest supply chain in the UK automotive sector, employing around 150,000 people. Give suppliers some certainty as the shutdown continues. Government will underwrite the loan through EDG, Export Development Guarantee, a financial support mechanism aimed at helping UK companies who sell overseas. Paid back over 5 years. Reserves as it makes a backlog of payments to its suppliers. No cars have been built this month, and the company has stopped placing orders with its 700 suppliers. Costing 50 million quid per week. Owned by India's Tata Motors. Typically builds 1,000 cars a day at its 3 factories. The bill will support the supply chain and protected jobs. Shadow Business Secretary Andrew Griffith welcomed the government's support. $30,000 people are directly employed by the company's plant. Okay. Furlough plea. This is where I saw furlough, and this is by the BBC 3 days ago, where they said the government should create a furlough scheme for workers affected. Will not restart until October 1st. So this was written before the last article we just read. Reassured. So it seems like they were deeply worrying time. Cyber attack on the 31st of August. Work around the clock. And these car companies are some of the most, they are embedded systems companies, whether they want to be or not. It's difficult to trudge through that when you're not traditionally, when you're a long-time supplier like Jaguar Land Rover and your business has not been centered around computers, and within the last 10, 15 years has just been completely immersed. And then I believe this was related to their operations. So even operations are changing within many companies, not just automotive companies, but you hear about robots and see robots being deployed throughout Amazon, and you're hearing about a lot of the bigger companies being able to handle workloads through AI-based systems, whether that be AI software or robotics. Probably, I don't know how much AI goes into that, but they're based off of what I've seen, several robotic systems within the operations of Amazon. You see that all over social media. Cyber attack was not only an assault on an iconic British brand, but a world-leading automotive sector and the men and women whose livelihood depend on it. And I think this was a youth hacker. And again, people say that not only an assault on an iconic British brand, it doesn't matter if it's British or not British, brand or not brand. Youth hackers have their own incentives that are separate from this right here. They're teenagers, they have a lot of power, and what they do is very impressive, and they're coordinated in their attacks. Company was forced to shut down most of its systems it uses to track parts, vehicles, and tooling in its factories, as well as everything to do with selling its luxury Range Rover, Discovery, and Defender SUVs. Restarted some of its IT systems and regained the ability to repay suppliers. Okay. We will move on from the Jaguar Land Rover incident to a personal identifiable information incident that occurred also in the UK. A nursery was hacked. Children's names, pictures, and addresses stolen. This is from the BBC. From the kiddo nursery chain, 8,000 children. That's terrible. Highly sensitive information. 18 sites around London, US, and India. Information about parents and carers with notes. This is not just, I mean, we can look at this. It goes into a digital twin context. It goes into a owning your data context and having these a true aggregation mechanism for your data. I'd be interested to understand how Chinese information systems work because I don't know, and I don't know if many Americans would be interested in something like that. But when it comes to maintaining information, this is the Web3 we're talking about. And when you have your information everywhere, and it's difficult in this day and age, you almost can do little to nothing online unless you give out information. And the way various organizations maintain your information is becoming hazardous to some degree. And here with children's data, it's very sensitive. Cybersecurity firm Checkpoint described the targeting of nurseries as an absolute new low. It's very low. It's very low. Quote, to deliberately put children in schools in the firing line is indefensible, unquote. Cyber criminals will target anyone if they think there is money to be made. Nursery told very quickly. Email from the hackers who told them what information had been taken. This is like a Black Mirror episode. There's a Black Mirror episode like this related to. I think there is. There's a lot of stigma around PII of young, youth, toddler, babies, various children. A pen test is a term, blah, 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 for ethical hackers. Latest series of high-profile attacks, especially in the United Kingdom. Okay. $8,000 children, kiddo. Broadcaster had been contacted by hackers, appear to be called Radiant, have published some stolen data, including pictures and profiles of 10 children on the darknet website. Parents care safeguarding notes. Inquiries are ongoing and remain in the early stages. This is from BBC News. Quote, it had challenged the hackers over using children's data to extort from a nursery and was told by the criminals, quote, weren't asking for an enormous amount, unquote, and they, quote, deserve some compensation for a pen test. A pen test is a penetration test for when ethical hackers are hired to assess the security of an organization in a controlled and professional way. Wow. Yes. And this is from Reuters. Summary Radiant. That's the group here. Kiddo International. Hackers claim Russian origin. Okay, we'll move on. Met Police received a referral on Thursday, 25 September, following reports of a ransomware attack on London-based organization. Quote, when hackers go for hospitals, schools, or in this case, nurseries, it feels like the lowest of the low. Unquote. It's very sensitive. It's very sensitive for obvious reasons. Okay, we'll move on. Okay. This is from CBC, Canada. Federal Cyber Agency warns of serious and urgent attack on tech used by remote workers. Clamp down on advanced and sophisticated espionage, popular security software used by remote workers, enable VPNs, underscoring the breadth of the issue, critical infrastructure sectors, including municipal, provincial, and territorial governments, adaptive security appliances, an attack on Cisco in May. Discovered the same threat actor exploited new vulnerabilities in devices to implant malware, execute commands, and potentially exfiltrate data from compromised devices. It might seem like a lot, and it is a lot. It is a lot. You have to know a lot about these systems to penetrate them. You have to try a lot. Coming down to first principles is important. I don't actively pen test. Cisco believes with high confidence the attackers are the same threat actors behind what's been called Arcane Door Campaign, state-sponsored actor running on espionage-focused campaign. And that makes sense because Cisco has it's a hardware system, critical infrastructure, connects networking across various protocols. Cisco's firewalls sit at the edge of thousands of Canadian organizations, exactly, including banks, hospitals, utilities, and public agencies. And let's just Google what Cisco does. Networking, hardware, software, and services that enable organizations to connect, protect, and innovate. And the implementation of the cloud has taken away a lot of that, because when you can just deploy cloud resources and you don't need that hardware. Some people do need on-premise hardware. A lot of organizations don't. Okay, we'll move on. And it'll be interesting to think of what happens if GPUs become extremely expensive on the cloud, and how that would affect I've been thinking about this. What would happen if GPUs on the cloud became extremely expensive and the necessity for individual organizations or enterprises to have their own amount of compute? It's an interesting thought, because if that's the case, and I think it seems like it might go this way, where it makes more sense to have your own GPUs running your own models. It becomes significantly cheaper when you don't have to do it on the cloud. But you'll see if that's a requirement, and people do need to go back to on-premise computing, simply because it goes from, I don't know. I've never set up a server. I've never set up a data center or anything like that. But if the limiting factor is energy and not necessarily the AI itself, it might make sense to do that. I'm not sure, but it seems like that's possible. Okay. U.S. cyber officials issue emergency directive after hackers breach government agency. Okay. And I'll go back to what we were talking about. Obviously, the government can do cloud-based work. Sometimes you can't, but a lot of their work is cloud-based as well. Cybersecurity and ISA said it was aware of ongoing exploitation campaign by an advanced threat actor towards Cisco. And we've seen this with Microsoft too. These are legacy infrastructure companies that have been around for a long time and are heavily deployed throughout the government, and a lot of government systems are older, and these companies are still looking to innovate, yet they have these legacy systems that are still heavily deployed. SharePoint is one for Microsoft. These networking systems that are being penetrated for Cisco are another. Intel, I'm sure, I don't really understand where, but I'm sure there's Intel technology throughout the government as well. Significant risk to victim networks. Hundreds of devices affected, being in the federal government. ISA. Emergency directive will help officials understand the full scope of the compromise. The attackers were observed to have exploited multiple zero-day vulnerabilities and employed advanced evasion techniques. Required extensive multidisciplinary responses across Cisco's engineering and security teams. Believes with high confidence the most recent related attack is the same threat actor, which we spoke about already. Okay. Cyber defense, Air Force developing new cyber campaign plan. Synchronize the work of different groups of cyber defenders. Undertaken by at least two different sets of teams: local defenders, persistent defensive systems, then cyber protection teams, defensive teams focused on hunting adversaries within the network. cyber SWAT. And there is need for harmonization between the two teams. And this is something that is coming throughout many different avenues of technology today. Is you have AI, you have crypto, you have robotics, biometrics, and it seems like there's going to be a huge integration of technologies. And that will lead to great innovation. The iPhone is probably the best example when you consider nothing about it was that scientific. It was great execution, great vision, great system integration, high quality system architecture, amazing product. And nothing about it was that scientific or novel individually. Individually, nothing was that novel. And then you bring it all together and it turns out to be the greatest product. Probably one of the greatest innovations of all time, if not the greatest innovation of our lifetime. Okay, we'll move on. And this is same here, so we'll continue with this. Harmonization, overarching strategy and process flow of information, and focuses on protecting critical operational sequences. Increasing complex and competitive global security environment. Mission threat defense safeguards. Okay, we'll move on. Many of the critical infrastructure systems are owned and operated by public utilities, not the U.S. government, even on military bases. Looking at the base defense itself, we can do all that we can do to defend these bases, but realize that those bases rely on public utilities. If those public utilities are attacked, we'll have a week, maybe 2 weeks of generator power to keep the missions going. But then that's it. We're out. How do we protect the public utilities that are feeding the bases so we can continue to fight? Boom. And again, on that, I'm going to actually do a plug for my company, Zayuk. Zayuk is a smart property system, infrastructure system. We are actually in the business of enterprise resource planning for power grid operators, for community choice aggregators, organizations that manage energy allocation throughout a region. It involves budgeting, management, and they're right. The public utilities that even the federal government relies on are based on these public utilities, and it's just an interesting concept that it all comes together, even with Zayuk. So I'll put that away and continue. Another thing, organizations. So we'll do AI. Deploying generative AI, the risks. What I've seen is MSPs, Model Context Protocol, MCP. There's a lot of hacking that's going on through Model Context Protocol, through systems being allowed to do complex data transforms through communication, through just speech. It's interesting, and it's something to consider in cybersecurity. I'm sure it will be an avenue of attack, almost surely. And it'll be interesting to see how security tools handle it in their upcoming. It's a complex system. You really have to consider it. It's not something that's just, I think, immediately going to be placed in security tools, understanding how to guard against a penetration that is AI based. It's going to attack your AI chatbot or your AI agent, and it's going to try and enable malicious activity within your system. But that is surely coming, and that is a vector of attack that many cyber criminals are going to go after. All right. Thank you, everyone, for this. It was fun. Saturday, September 27th. Hopefully, you all are having a good Saturday evening and taking care. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.